Okay, so here's part two of the video, and where I left off, I took this case off, and I made a mistake. Um, I guess just in my means of trying to get this thing pulled apart, because I don't like spending too much time on just disassembly and tear down. I suggest going ahead and removing this, because of what had happened to me. There's the drive collar itself for your speedometer. You have this guy. So what happened was when I pulled it up, it fell like that, obviously. So what happens is if you don't remove that speedometer, it's going to pull this guy up with it. I mean, the teeth mesh in between the gear and the cog. And then what you don't want to lose, which thankfully it fell and dropped down into the case, you have ball bearings that seat and lock this collar down. I mean, there's a groove there for the ball. So you want to kind of retain this stuff and keep it all the way that it came. But that allows it to not spin on the shaft. But if you don't know what orientation it is at, it's usually on the cut of the keyway, a few teeth away from it. So you can kind of rotate that at 12 o'clock and then remove it, just so you don't end up losing your bearing. See, the bearing is still right there. So go ahead and put that ball bearing off into the cut. These are just a little bit bigger than a BB, and they will go rolling all over the place. So make sure you do that. And before you even tear down the case any further than that, you also have another one here as well. Let's see if I can pull this off without losing it. Okay. So this is your oil pump drive itself. And then, excuse me, it doesn't have a ball bearing, but there's location holes in the oiler itself. That doesn't need any explanation on that. There's no orientation on it. Oil just feeds the shaft. So you'll go ahead and remove that part and set that to the side as well, just so you don't lose anything in particular. Next off, it's like what I was stating. A lot of the bearings, they're not really press fit. I mean, you have a couple that are pretty tight tolerances, especially this one here is a pretty tight one. It takes a little bit of persuasion to get it off, but once it starts, it usually comes off pretty easy. But all the others normally just slide off. So all of these bearings are rusted. They spin freely. There's no binding or anything else like that, but we're gonna go ahead and replace them. We've got a little bit of slop to them. So like I said, you just kind of want to leave everything in order as you removed off of the case. And you take your bolts, take your little small parts, the oil pickup tubes, things like that, and just set them off to the side in a cup. And then, I mean, there's no real particular order that you need to really disassemble this. I mean, I would just like to kind of leave myself a little bit more organized so I know what I'm looking at whenever I'm grabbing stuff. But other than that, the instructions from Trail Gear and everything else, it'll give you a description of everything, so you can lay it all back out and get the T case properly assembled, or you can refer back to the video, whichever you prefer. Um, but other than that, once we're at this point, I'm going to just go ahead and remove the remaining bolts around the case. We will go ahead and remove this retaining clip, the C clip. We'll go ahead and do that right now. Try and do this one-handed here. My C clip pliers are not the best. They're just some generic old junkers, but y'all get the rough idea of what's going on here. In some cases, you might even be able to get your hand in here on the case and pick up on the bearing a little. Do it that way. Because my C-clip pliers are not actually spreading far enough for this clip, but it's really not that big of a deal. Kind of get into the C-clip, which, let me set my phone back down. Let's see. An important is just clamps and some other miscellaneous stuff. Should have probably got that out of the way anyway. Alrighty, so take the C-clip here and wedge my screwdriver in. I'm going to pry it away and up at the same time. Well, that's not working for me exactly like I would like it to do. Let's see. It's pretty neat though. I like these little things. Even though they're just cheap little C-clip pliers, actually pretty cool. I didn't realize it had a second hole on there to where I can actually get this thing to spread out a tad bit further and get me a little bit of a gap. You don't need much, just enough to kind of, oh, if anyone has ever worked on a C-clip knows that they're kind of one of the most finicky little things to have to deal with. They're not terrible. It's definitely not your friend. So I don't know if y'all were able to see that, but I just spread it just enough to get me a little gap in there. And then stuck my screwdriver underneath and kind of just lift it up. And then I kind of just take it, and it doesn't take much force. Just pop that guy off of there like that. These are all individual sizes, like so. Let's set that to the side there. Y'all don't be alarmed about the surface that I'm working on or anything else like that. I have a clean table that I will assemble all of this on, so there's not all this dumb stuff. Just a bunch of old stuff from other tea cases I've torn down. This is kind of where I just do it. It's at a good height for me to work. But none of these rings are the same size. You have, I think it's maybe like 2 bearings in there that use the same size clip, but they're main bearings, and you'll be able to tell the difference on what's what. So like I said, like organization, I mean, it's just kind of your own personal preference. I don't do it in any particular order. I've done it enough times to know where everything goes. But okay, so once you've removed that clip, you have all this other stuff out the way. Not that it's going to interfere with the case anyway. You take out the remainder of the bolts that you need to remove. Already had a few of them removed for what's called the crawl box. And we'll continue to get the T case disassembled. All right, so that's all of the bolts out of that. Now, referring to all of the bolts, everything is going to consist of these length bolts. You have short ones, and you have some what's considered to be like a medium length, and then you have really long, which those run through all three portions of the case. So you have ones that'll retain two portions of the case, which those would be your mediums. Your shorts will only retain the case to the transmission bolts, or your outer flanges and things like that. You have four little short guys that retain your front plate. Those are the same size as the ones for your shifter, which is on the other side, but you get what I'm saying. You have the four bolts for the shifter, and you have four bolts that are up here on the retaining plate for the output shaft seal for the front output. So they're it's not going to be very complicated, just even having them a strew and just laying around and stuff like that. You're not going to be able to mix them up. They're either going to thread into the holes that they go into, or they're not. So there's no real big order on all that stuff. So I'm just basically making this video as an informative thing, maybe to help guys, help save anyone that may have been intimidated by this stuff. Anybody can do it. You don't need to go and spend $1,850 on a rebuilt transfer case from Trail Gear or something like that, when you could clearly disassemble your own T case, inspect it, check condition of parts, everything else like that, and replace what's necessary and things like that. Either do a minor rebuild, which is just gasket and seals, or do a major rebuild and replace all of the actual bearing and components that are making this thing spin, other than gears themselves and your cogs and everything else like that. So yeah, we'll proceed. So as I was saying, you have tapping points on the case, so that's what we'll use them for. Like I said, you don't need to do any crazy beating on this stuff. This stuff will all separate. It's just little paper gaskets. Unless the case has been into before and someone sealed it up with like black RTV or something, it's really not going to fight you. If it has the factory original Toyota paper gaskets on it and things like that, they normally come off very easy. So you just give it a little light taps. Nothing crazy. I'm not going to town on this thing. I'm not chucked up on the hammer far, as you can see. I mean, a full length hammer. I'm using it like right here. I'm just sorry. I know the video might be a little loud too. So I'm gonna do that, and gives you 3 points. You have one here, one back over here. Yeah, that's a point for the other part of the case. Which once we separate these two, that'll be the whole case separated. So then you can see all of the internals. So as you can notice, we started getting a little gap. The sound changed from being a solid sound to a pretty hollowed tap. Like again, once you kind of get it broke apart, it all comes apart really easy. You're just gonna want to work this thing in a couple different areas just to break the gaskets loose. But also there's retaining dowels. There's a dowel pin here that retains and recesses the case. And there's a retaining dowel here as well that recesses and locates the case. So in all actuality, you should be able to just tap the case up. Sometimes it really doesn't work that way. You may need to just pry it open a little bit, like how I did, which is no problem. Just try not to gouge or where I stuck the screwdriver there. Just don't want to put any deep cuts or anything else like that where potentially leak oil and not have a good gasket seal after the fact, because then at that point you will be required to use a little RTV just to go ahead and to get a good seal on that. So once you've actually got everything kind of coming up, this bearing is dropping down into the case. That's why you needed to remove that C-clip. So there's your high-speed section of the transfer case of a Toyota gear-driven transfer case. As I have said, this is all mainly surface rust. You can see the sheen in there from oil and things like that. This stuff will clean up no problem. What we're looking at getting out and cleaning out of this case is just all of this residual old rust and just, as I like to call it, some old pooty, dude. We'll just get all of that stuff out. Make sure the case is nice and shiny on the inside, just like you would on any other transmission, transfer case, anything. You just want to get everything super clean. That way you're not contaminating fresh oil once this thing's put back together. So that is that part of the case. There's nothing in it. Oh, excuse me. Needle roller bearing and stuff, the high-speed caged bearings, that bearing in particular will sit on that gear. So you have to do a little bit of persuasion of this case to kind of get this thing, but it normally just walks off. It's not too hard to do it. And so, and just